Congress convenes today to certify President-elect Trump's election win. We're getting some new details surrounding his hush money conviction sentencing. Trump's legal team is asking to delay that sentencing, which the judge scheduled for this Friday, after rejecting his team's attempts to toss his conviction. Joining us now, CNN senior legal analyst and former federal prosecutor Ali Honig. So here you go. Trump asking the judge to postpone his sentencing, which is currently, as I noted, scheduled to happen on Friday. It could have happened by Zoom. What's Trump's legal argument here for the postponement, Ali?
Yeah, Pam, I had a feeling he was going to try to delay this, and sure enough, he has. So Trump is arguing immunity on two different levels relating to the hush money case. First, he's arguing that some of the evidence that was admitted against him at the hush money trial related to the time he was president. Therefore, he should have been immune for that. Therefore, he's entitled to a new trial.
Hey guys, Adam is here. So what is happening right now? Constitutional scholars, former federal prosecutors, and ethics watchdogs are all delivering the same warning to everyone running Trump's legal operation. Executive protection has an expiration date. The moment Trump leaves office, the shield dissolves, and everything done under its cover becomes fair game for prosecutors with no loyalty to protect.
Today, an indictment was unsealed, charging Donald J. Trump with conspiring to defraud the United States, conspiring to disenfranchise voters, and conspiring and attempting to obstruct an official proceeding. The indictment was issued by a grand jury of citizens here in the District of Columbia, and it sets forth the crimes charged in detail. I encourage everyone to read it in full. The attack on our nation's capital on January 6, 2021, was an unprecedented assault on the seat of American democracy. As described in the indictment, it was fueled by lies. Lies by the defendant targeted at obstructing a bedrock function of the U.S. government, the nation's process of collecting, counting, and certifying the results of the presidential election.
In my administration, I'm going to enforce all laws concerning the protection of classified information. No one will be above the law.
I'm an innocent man. I did nothing wrong. And we will fight this out just like we've been fighting for 7 years.
This isn't hyperbolic speculation from cable news pundits trying to fill airtime. This is the sober, carefully considered conclusion of 50 legal experts surveyed by the New York Times, a group spanning the ideological spectrum from conservative institutionalists to progressive constitutional scholars. Their collective assessment is chilling in its clarity and bipartisan in its consensus. Many individuals currently serving in senior positions within Trump's Department of Justice could face federal criminal exposure once their boss departs the White House.
Since the attack on our Capitol, the Department of Justice has remained committed to ensuring accountability for those criminally responsible for what happened that day. This case is brought consistent with that commitment, and our investigation of other individuals continues. In this case, my office will seek a speedy trial so that our evidence can be tested in court and judged by a jury of citizens. In the meantime, I must emphasize that the indictment is only an allegation and that the defendant must be presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law.
We're talking about the inner circle here. Pam Bondi, the Attorney General who has transformed the nation's top law enforcement agency into what critics call a private vengeance firm. Kash Patel, the FBI director whose bureau has been deployed like a paramilitary wing of the Trump political operation, conducting raids and making arrests that align with surgical precision with the president's enemies list. Dan Bongino, the deputy FBI director who has used conservative media appearances to openly champion investigations that just happen to target people who've crossed Donald Trump. These individuals and the subordinates who executed their directives are now operating with legal targets painted on their backs, targets that become vulnerable the instant their presidential protector loses immunity.
If you're wondering how President Trump's retribution tour is going, well, take a look at the new charges against former FBI Director James Comey this week. Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche charged Comey with threatening the president. The key piece of evidence, Comey's now deleted post from last year of seashells arranged in the numbers 8647. MS Now is learning that the case was on the back burner until Pam Bondi was fired. That is according to two people familiar with the effort. Sources say, quote, after Bondi was out and a new acting attorney general, that is Todd Blanche, sought to win Trump's appointment to the job permanently, the Seychelles case gained new steam. Bondi pushed her team to pursue charges against Comey for lying to Congress, but that case was actually dismissed last year. In these new charges, however, Comey is charged with knowingly and willfully making a threat against the president and transmitting a threat in interstate commerce, according to the indictment.
The mechanism of their potential downfall is already being constructed. Legal watchdog organizations, the kind of methodical and relentless groups that employ former prosecutors and forensic accountants, are building archives. They're documenting every suspicious indictment, every irregular investigation, every deviation from established Department of Justice procedures, every public statement from Trump demanding prosecutions followed by actual prosecutions of the named targets. Every private message leaked or accidentally posted that reveals the true motivation behind official actions. This documentation isn't vague political opposition research destined for campaign mailers. It's being compiled with the precision of a criminal case file, admissible evidence, timelines, witness statements from whistleblowers, contemporaneous notes from career officials who watched in horror as their institution was corrupted. When the presidential term ends, those files don't vanish. They become the foundational material for the next administration's potential prosecutions. The pattern of behavior that's generating this legal peril is so blatant that even lifelong Republican legal hands are wincing. Trump's Department of Justice has embarked on what can only be described as an indictment spree targeting the president's political adversaries. John Bolton, the former national security advisor who served Trump, then broke with him, wrote a tell-all memoir, and testified about presidential misconduct, found his home raided by federal agents. He was indicted for illegal retention of classified material, the very same category of offense that Trump himself has been accused of committing. The selective prosecution is transparent. Hundreds of former officials have accidentally retained classified documents without facing criminal charges. Bolton was singled out not because his document handling was uniquely egregious, but because he committed the unforgivable sin of disloyalty. He criticized the president. He revealed uncomfortable truths. He became, in Trump's vernacular, an enemy, and enemies must be crushed. James Comey, the former FBI director whose firing triggered the Mueller investigation and who has been a persistent critic of Trump's assault on law enforcement independence, has been indicted. Letitia James, the New York Attorney General who pursued fraud investigations against Trump's business empire and refused to be intimidated by presidential bluster, faces federal charges. The list extends further, a roster of the prosecuted that reads like a who's who of individuals who have drawn Trump's public wrath. At campaign rallies, in social media posts, during interviews, Trump named these people. He called for action against them. He demanded that his attorney general serve justice upon his enemies. And then, with the reliability of a metronome, the Justice Department acted. The targets Trump identified became the defendants Bondi's prosecutors charged. This sequence, presidential demand followed by prosecutorial action, is the smoking gun that legal experts say transforms these cases from aggressive law enforcement into criminal abuse of power. The legal theory underpinning potential future prosecutions is straightforward. Government officials are prohibited from using their positions to pursue personal or political vendettas. Civil rights statutes criminalize conspiracies to deprive individuals of their constitutional rights, which includes the right to be free from malicious prosecution. Obstruction of justice statutes cover interference with legitimate investigations, which could apply if Bondi's DOJ protected Trump allies while exclusively targeting his critics. Abuse of office, deprivation of rights under color of law, conspiracy against rights. The Federal Criminal Code contains multiple avenues for charging officials who corrupt the machinery of government for partisan ends. What makes these potential cases so powerful is the evidentiary trail. Trump's own words, preserved in digital amber, show him demanding prosecutions. The timing of subsequent indictments shows the Justice Department complying. Internal communications, if obtained by future investigators, could reveal the direct transmission of orders from the White House to the Attorney General's office. The case practically builds itself. The historical precedent looming over this moment is Watergate, the scandal that forced Richard Nixon's resignation and sent his top officials to prison. John Mitchell, Nixon's Attorney General, served time. H.R. Haldeman and John Ehrlichman, the presidential chief of staff and domestic policy advisor, respectively, were convicted and imprisoned. The message from that era was unambiguous. Using government power for political purposes carries personal criminal liability. The conduct currently unfolding at Trump's Justice Department, legal scholars argue, exceeds Watergate in its systematic nature and its destructive impact on institutional norms. Watergate was a burglary and a cover-up, a discrete criminal conspiracy. What's happening now is the wholesale transformation of the entire Department of Justice into a political weapon. If Mitchell went to prison for his role in Nixon's abuses, the reasoning goes, then Bondi and her colleagues face exposure, that is, if anything, more severe. The knowledge of this legal vulnerability is undoubtedly circulating among the very officials it threatens. Good lawyers, and these officials have access to excellent legal counsel, would be advising their clients about the risks they're accumulating. Every indictment they approve, every investigation they authorize against a Trump critic, every public statement they make defending these actions as legitimate is another piece of evidence in a future case file. Some officials might be rationalizing their conduct, telling themselves that the prosecutions they're pursuing are legally justified regardless of the political context, that they'd be bringing these cases regardless of who was president. But the pattern is too stark. The correlation between Trump's demands and DOJ actions too perfect. Imagining a jury presented with a timeline showing presidential tweets calling for someone's prosecution, followed weeks later by that person's indictment, and the defense argument that this was all coincidence, is difficult. Juries are allowed to use common sense, and common sense says this is retaliation, not justice. There's another psychological dimension to consider. The type of people drawn to wield power in this manner often possess a certain arrogance, a belief that normal rules don't apply to them, that their political protectors will always be in a position to shield them. They might be telling themselves that Republicans will win the next election, that a GOP successor to Trump will continue to protect them, that the accountability experts warn about is a partisan fantasy that will never materialize. But elections are unpredictable. Political fortunes shift. The same voters who swept Trump into office could sweep in a Democratic administration determined to restore norms and punish those who demolish them. Counting on perpetual Republican control of the executive branch as a legal defense strategy is not a gamble that prudent lawyers would recommend. The clock ticks regardless of who's leading in the polls. The international implications compound the domestic crisis. For decades, the United States has positioned itself as the world's arbiter of rule of law standards, sending observers to monitor foreign elections, funding judicial reform programs in developing democracies, sanctioning foreign officials who engage in political persecution. That moral authority is being incinerated by images of FBI raids on former White House officials who wrote critical books, by news of state attorneys general facing federal prosecution after investigating the president's businesses, by footage of an attorney general who refuses to answer congressional questions about whether she's following orders to punish dissidents. Authoritarian leaders around the world are watching, and they're taking notes. When America criticizes their treatment of political opponents, they'll now have a devastating rejoinder. You do the same thing. The credibility cost is immense and will take generations to rebuild, if rebuilding is even possible. The personal stakes for officials like Pam Bondi cannot be overstated. She's not a minor functionary carrying out someone else's policy preferences. She's the head of the Department of Justice, the official ultimately responsible for every prosecution her department undertakes. When future investigators ask who authorized the indictment of John Bolton, who approved the investigation of Letitia James, who directed resources toward pursuing Trump's enemies while corruption cases against Trump allies went dormant, the answer will lead to her desk. She's the signatory. She's the accountable party. Legal experts surveyed by The Times specifically highlight the Attorney General's unique exposure. Her confirmation hearings contained promises of independence that her actions have allegedly betrayed, creating potential liability for false statements to Congress. Her management of the department, dismantling the public corruption unit that would normally investigate abuses of exactly the type she's allegedly committing, suggests consciousness of guilt. Her dramatic storming out of Senate hearings rather than answering questions about her conduct adds obstruction of oversight to the potential charge sheet. Kash Patel's situation is similarly precarious. As FBI director, he controls the investigative machinery that's been turned against Trump's critics. The raids, the arrests, the grand jury subpoenas all flow through his bureau. His extensive public commentary, his appearances on friendly media outlets celebrating his loyalty to Trump, his statements that could be interpreted as acknowledging political motivations behind investigations, all of it is admissible evidence. Prosecutors love defendants who talk publicly because every statement becomes a potential admission. Patel has talked extensively, perhaps believing that his audience is only the sympathetic MAGA base, not realizing that future prosecutors are also listening, transcribing, and filing away his words for later use. Dan Bongino occupies a unique category of exposure. He's not just an FBI deputy director executing orders, he's a public-facing cheerleader for the politicization. His transition from conservative media personality to senior law enforcement official is itself evidence of the department's transformation. The message his appointment sent was clear. Loyalty to Trump now outweighs professional qualifications. In a future prosecution, his media appearances defending political investigations could be Exhibit A, demonstrating that the department's leadership not only engaged in political prosecutions, but celebrated them publicly, erasing any defense that they were merely enforcing the law apolitically. The cascade of legal jeopardy extends beyond the top tier. Mid-level officials, line prosecutors who signed off on questionable indictments, FBI agents who executed raids they knew were politically motivated, staff attorneys who drafted memos creating flimsy legal justifications for targeting Trump's enemies, all of them could face scrutiny. The Nuremberg defense, "I was just following orders," has no legal force in American jurisprudence. Government employees have an affirmative obligation to refuse illegal orders. Participation, even reluctant participation, can constitute criminal liability. This creates a chilling dynamic within the department. Some officials, aware of their exposure, might begin documenting their objections, creating paper trails showing they raised concerns, slowing down investigations, quietly undermining the most egregious directives. Others might decide the risk is too great and resign, triggering a brain drain that further degrades the department's capacity. Still others might accelerate their efforts, figuring they're already compromised and might as well demonstrate maximum loyalty in hopes of future protection. The pardon question injects additional uncertainty. Trump possesses the constitutional authority to issue preemptive pardons to his officials, theoretically insulating them from federal prosecution. But such pardons would be political cyanide. Issuing blanket pardons to Justice Department officials for crimes not yet charged would be an admission that crimes were committed, that the entire apparatus was corrupt. It would dominate news cycles, potentially swing elections, and even then only cover federal crimes. State prosecutors in jurisdictions like New York, California, or other Democratic strongholds could still bring charges under state laws. Pardons are shields with large holes, and officials relying on them for protection are making a dangerous bet. The watchdog infrastructure that's documenting everything deserves particular attention because it represents a new phenomenon in American politics. Previous administrations engaged in norm violations that were poorly documented, relying on the passage of time and the fading of memories to erase accountability. This administration is operating in an era of ubiquitous digital surveillance where every public statement is archived, every internal communication leaves metadata traces, and whistleblowers have encrypted channels to share evidence with organizations that specialize in preserving it for future use. Democracy Docket and similar legal watchdog groups are not merely writing angry op-eds. They're building the equivalent of prosecutorial case files, complete with exhibits, witness statements, and legal analysis. When a future administration considers whether to pursue charges against Trump officials, these organizations will hand over complete, ready-made investigative files. The infrastructure of accountability has been professionalized. The political dimension is inseparable from the legal dimension. The 2028 election will effectively determine whether any of this accountability materializes. A Republican victory would likely foreclose federal prosecutions, though state-level actions might continue. A Democratic victory, particularly one that sweeps in a president and attorney general committed to restoring institutional norms, would open the door wide to criminal investigations. This creates a perverse incentive for the officials currently running the Justice Department. They have a personal, direct, and intense interest in ensuring Republican electoral success because their freedom may depend on it. That same interest could perversely drive them to even more aggressive abuses of power, using their positions to influence election outcomes in ways that benefit the party that will protect them from prosecution. The cycle of corruption becomes self-reinforcing, each act of abuse creating more need for protection, each need for protection driving more acts of abuse. What makes this moment uniquely dangerous in American history is the combination of factors. You have a Department of Justice that has abandoned any pretense of independence. You have officials who face genuine criminal exposure for their actions. You have upcoming elections that will determine whether that exposure becomes actual prosecution, and you have a polarized public that processes these events through entirely separate information ecosystems, one half seeing a heroic president fighting a corrupt establishment, the other half seeing an authoritarian dismantling democratic safeguards. The conditions for a constitutional crisis are all present, arranged like dry timber waiting for a spark. The experts who spoke to the New York Times weren't engaging in partisan wish-casting. Their consensus reflects a careful reading of legal statutes, historical precedent, and the factual record of what's actually happening inside the Department of Justice. They're applying the same analytical frameworks they would apply to any situation where government power is being used for personal political ends. The conclusion is inescapable. Crimes are being committed, evidence is being generated, and the only question is whether future prosecutors will have the institutional courage and political support to act on what the evidence shows. For the officials at the center of this storm, the calculus must be unnerving. They're being told, by serious people with serious credentials, that their actions are building criminal cases against themselves. They're watching as watchdog groups meticulously catalog their conduct. They're reading legal analyses explaining the statutes they're potentially violating. They're aware that presidential terms end, that political winds shift, that the protection they currently enjoy is temporary. Some must be losing sleep, weighing the costs of continued loyalty against the risks of future prosecution, wondering if the rewards Trump offers are worth the jeopardy they're accumulating. Others are likely true believers, convinced of their righteousness, certain that history will vindicate them, dismissive of legal threats as partisan noise. History is littered with officials who held that conviction right up until the moment the jury verdict was read. The broader American public, distracted by the daily barrage of news and the demands of ordinary life, may not fully grasp the gravity of what's unfolding. The transformation of the Department of Justice into a political weapon is not a process that announces itself with trumpets. It happens incrementally through individual prosecutions that can each be individually defended as legitimate, through procedural changes that seem technical, through appointments of loyalists that can be explained as normal political staffing. Only when viewed as a whole does the pattern become unmistakable. And by the time the pattern is undeniable to most observers, the damage may be irreversible. The question is whether accountability, when and if it arrives, can serve as a deterrent, establishing that this kind of abuse will be punished, that future officials considering similar conduct will think twice, that the rule of law retains enough vitality to defend itself against those who would strangle it. That's the stakes of this moment. Not just the legal fate of a few Trump appointees, but the future of American governance. If these officials face prosecution and conviction, the message will be that the system, battered and bruised, still functions, that abusing power carries consequences, that no one, not even the Attorney General or the FBI director, is above the law. If they escape accountability, if political protection or electoral outcomes shield them from prosecution, the message will be the opposite. That power provides immunity. That loyalty to the right person is a get-out-of-jail-free card. That the norms and laws constraining government conduct are merely suggestions, enforceable only against the politically weak. That message, once sent, will be received by every future administration of every party. The cycle of weaponization will accelerate. The Department of Justice will become permanently politicized, just another prize to be captured and turned against the losers of each election. The clock keeps ticking, and the choices made in the coming years will echo for generations.